So everyone, as I mentioned before, this is our Get On Board series. It's brought to you by the Assisi Foundation of Memphis. They do so much good here in the Mid-South and beyond. We're honored to have a long-time relationship with them in terms of sponsoring and being a huge part of this Get On Board series. And so we're excited for that partnership, but also what it means for you all. As I mentioned, it's a quarterly series. All the different topics come from you all. And so it's your chance for any sort of opportunity, challenge that you're seeing or facing to send it our way. And then we go out and we find coaches and experts to step in and present this series. So it's all focused on interactivity, and that's where we appreciate you joining in, but we also appreciate all of your dialogue. And so this is one of those where when you talk about reducing friction, how do we engage and simplify the process for our volunteers, for our employees, for our donors, for our messaging, our storytelling? We found the perfect person in Matt Lyles. And so Matt, he's a former Fortune 100 brand strategy lead turned speaker, author, brand, and customer experience consultant. He's host of the Simple Brand podcast. He's the author of the upcoming book, Simple Brand. It's releasing in January of 2023. For over 15 years, he's helped brands like FedEx, Southwest Airlines, and the Hands On Network tell their story. He leads a crusade of simplicity to help companies transform their customer and employee experience. And now he's bringing this crusade to you. The music is off and the stage is all yours. Matt Lyles, take it away, buddy.
Hey, Jeremy. Thank you so much. Wow. Like Jeremy said, I am a big fan of simplicity. That is what my focus has been, my passion has been for a number of years. That's actually what I got to do when I was there in Memphis. And now I get to teach companies all over how to create and deliver simple experiences for their people. But I got a question for you before we start. How would you feel if someone told you, I wouldn't miss you if you went away? Or how would you feel if someone said, you know what, you're totally losing relevance in my life? And Jeremy, I apologize. Jeremy said, Matt, let's start off with a positive note. Even Jasmine said, it's Earth Day, make it a positive one. These are not positive questions, but I'm positive. This is what brands are hearing from their customers. This is what brands are hearing from the public. Brands are losing their relevance more rapidly today than at any other point in history. But before we even get further, I want to talk to you about brands. And I want to make sure that you have a good understanding of what a brand is. So a lot of you have been in the chat already. Pop in the chat right there. Tell me, what do you say is the definition of a brand? And I'll wait. A brand is a promise. Yeah, I've seen that. The people behind it. Oh, that's good. Yeah. Oh, there you go. What people say about you when you're not in the room. You've been peeking ahead, Andrew, I think. A lot of people, when they talk about brands, they have a bit of a misconception about what a brand is. So a lot of times people will say that a brand is a logo. A brand is not a logo. People will say, well, I love Apple. I love their brand, that Apple. Well, a brand is not a logo. A brand is not a set of colors. Sometimes people will look at somebody like, Coke and say, oh, I love their red and white brand. Or you bring it down to Memphis, oh, FedEx, I love their orange and purple brand. Well, a brand is not a set of colors. And a brand is not a tagline. Think of Nike. A lot of people say, oh, I love their brand. I love their Just Do It brand. Well, a brand is not a tagline. So if all those things are not what a brand is, what is a brand? A brand is the sum total of all experiences that you have with an organization. It's the sum total of everything that you've even ever heard about that organization. And that sum total is defined by the overall experience. A lot of companies will refer to it as the customer experience. But if you're a nonprofit, you can think about it as your donor experience, your volunteer experience, your constituent experience. That's what a brand is. And, I have a story. My son, when he was just a toddler, he actually taught me the value and taught me of the value of knowing your brand. When he was a toddler, he was cute and he was so outgoing to everyone. There was no stranger danger with this guy. One day, he and my wife were walking. They were walking into the Croc Center, actually. They were walking to the Croc Center, and there were a couple of people coming out. They had just finished their workout. They were all tired. They were all sweaty. Didn't want to have to interact with anybody or say hello. But my outgoing son walked up to him and said, "Hi, my name is Alan Jefferson Lyles. But my mommy calls me Alan Jefferson Lyles. Don't hit, don't kick, don't punch, don't pinch." And from right there, I knew that my son had taught me a valuable lesson in branding. Because bad news, your brand isn't what you say it is, it's what they say it is. Who are they? They are everyone who interacts with you. They're everyone who says, when I think of this person, when I think of this organization, these are the attributes that I have in mind. Now, you may say that these are the attributes that you want your brand to be known by, but it's what they say that matters. Now, good news, you've got the ability and the tools to influence what they say your brand is. So, and the goal is for you to make sure that what they say your brand is matches what you say. And like Andrew said, your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. And the brands that are the strongest ones that are the strongest ones in the world are the ones that have built their brands up over time through consistency. It's the consistency that delivers what people define about your brand. It's that consistency that builds trust. It's that consistency that builds loyalty. You can see here right next to me, I've got Target. I've got the Target brand showing. You can see that they're very consistent in everything that they showcase to their people, to their customers. The same colors, the same messaging, the same imagery, the same store layout. And it's that consistency that builds trust, that builds loyalty. And when you have loyalty, that loyalty turns into value. So, apologies to Forrest Gump, but your brand should not be like a box of chocolates. People should know what they're going to get every single time. Now, unfortunately, today, consistency is no longer enough to keep customers' loyalty. When you think about where we are today, 2022, the world has evolved at a rapid pace. And the pandemic that we've experienced over the past couple of years has just amplified that even more. Everyone is experiencing more and more complexity in their lives. And with that, everyone wants to be able to interact with a brand, interact with a company by their own terms. They want to interact with them where they want to, how they want to. Not only that, when you think of how complicated everything is, when you think of how complex everything is, we're being bombarded with, and the estimates are, kind of a wide, but we're being bombarded with between 5,000 to 10,000 brand impressions every single day. That means all the billboards that you see when you're driving to and from work on your commute. That means all the digital interactions and the digital ads that you see whenever you're online. And because of all that, we now have an attention span less than that of a goldfish. We have an attention span less than 9 seconds. That means that if you want to attract and retain someone's attention, you have to be able to cut through all that clutter and to be able to get to the point with clarity. And people are saying, when you think of what your people value, what they value more than anything else, it's their time. And the best way that you can provide that value to somebody is helping them to save time. And when we think of complexity, we can think of our own life and realize, a lot of the times when we're stressed out, it's because we've got so many demands beating down on us from so many other places. And some of those demands are actually just demands from people trying to get our attention. And that's why we're recognizing complexity, and your people are recognizing complexity and trying to run away from it as quickly as possible. In fact, complexity is so toxic that it was actually used as wartime sabotage in World War II. In World War II, the Office of Strategic Solutions, they were the precursor to the CIA. They came up with what they referred to as a simple sabotage field manual for all of their spies that were over in Axis countries. And all these spies had to do was get integrated into their communities and deliver complexity in those communities. And it's a 30-plus page field manual of all the different ways that you can go into a community and bring morale of the people down simply by delivering complexity. Some of my favorites were: multiply the procedures and clearances involved in issuing instructions, paychecks, and so on. See that 3 people have to approve everything when only 1 person would do. Or how about this one? Give lengthy and incomprehensible explanations whenever requested. Or, during that time, 80 plus years ago, train travel was very common. So they focused on the train travel experience. Make train travel as inconvenient as possible. Make mistakes. See that the food is especially bad. All that to say is that complexity is highly toxic, and people will run away from complexity every moment that they get. So if complexity is toxic, then the one way to battle complexity is through simplicity. And there's stats, there's research that shows that there's value behind delivering simplicity. And my favorite organization, my favorite agency that studies simplicity is Siegel Gale. A handful of years ago in my corporate role, I was such a fanboy of them. I used all their material in my research, and now I've actually gotten to be friends with them because we're both on the front lines of leading what I call the Crusade of Simplicity. So Siegel Gale, every couple of years, releases their world's simplest brand report. And in it, they show the updated stats around the value of simplicity. And one of the first stats of those is that simplicity pays. 64% of consumers are willing to pay more. They're willing to pay a premium price for simpler experiences. Simplicity is shared. 69% of consumers are more likely to recommend a brand because it's simple. Simplicity inspires. This one's my favorite one. 62% of employees are considered loyal brand champions at their companies when their companies are perceived as simple. And then simplicity rewards. And this is more for the for-profit space, but this just shows you how valuable and how financially valuable simplicity really is. 1,600%, not a typo. 1,600% is how much the top 10 simplest brands in the world have beaten the global stock index since 2009. And all this shows you is that there truly is value around delivering simplicity to your people. So in the chat, I've got a quick poll for you, so let me know down in the chat. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being you're so complex that even the IRS makes fun of you. 10 being you are so simple, Google tries to study your website. On a scale of 1 to 10, how simple would you say that your customer experience is? And it doesn't matter what business you are. So you can think of your customers as your actual customers, your constituents, your donors, or even your volunteers. Oh, a 9. Wow. Great job, Kim. 4, 5, okay. 5. You know what? Not bad. That's kind of the average. And here's the thing. Most customers would say that most of the brands that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis are probably below a 5. And here's the thing. When you think of yourself and you think of the experience that you deliver, you may say to yourself, oh, you know what? My experience that I deliver is simple compared to my competitors. So I'm okay. As long as I'm comparing myself to what my competitors provide, then if I can be better than them, then that will work. That's unfortunately not the case. Today, in 2022, you're no longer compared to just your direct competitors. You're compared to the simplest brands in the world. Your customers are comparing you to Amazon, to Google, to Netflix, to Spotify, to Costco. They compare you to the Domino's pizza tracker. If your customers can see where their pizza is in its delivery process, where the pizza's being made, when the pizza gets out of the oven, if your customer can track their pizza being delivered through their neighborhood, they expect the same level of information. They expect that same experience with you. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter who your competitors are. Your customers and your people are comparing you to the last best experience that they've had. And now you may say, well, that's great, Matt, but we don't have billions of dollars like those other brands to be able to develop those experiences. And that's okay. You don't have to. Over the past handful of years, I've studied the simplest brands and have studied what it takes to deliver simple experiences to your people. And what I've found is that there's commonality in the simplest brands and the companies that deliver simple experiences, and have developed the behaviors that define how to deliver simple experiences to your people, no matter who you are, no matter who your people are. So if you're, like I think Kim Cherry says, if you're a company of one, these same behaviors apply. If you're a Fortune 100 company, these behaviors apply. If you're a nonprofit focused only in your local area, these same behaviors apply. Now you may say, well, hang on, wait a second, Matt. Why behaviors? A lot of times our board or our executive team, they'll go out on an annual strategy retreat and they'll come back and they'll say, oh, you know what? Going forward, these are our main principles, or these are our main tenets, or these are our main values that we're going to follow. Well, the thing is about principles, tenets, values, a lot of times when companies present those to their employees may say, okay, great, but what does that mean to me in my role? How do I deliver those in my role? And that's why it's important to define behaviors. Behaviors that every single employee can deliver in their role. Every single employee, from the board to the C-suite to the front line. And I've actually developed and defined what I found are the 6 key behaviors that go into creating and delivering simple experiences. And just to help you be able to remember them more easily, I've put them into the acronym of SIMPLE, S-I-M-P-L-E. And we'll go through those behaviors right now. The first of those behaviors is simple never stops. It's recognizing that what was considered simple 2 years ago is no longer considered simple today. What's considered simple today is not going to be considered simple 2 years from now. So you have to be looking at the experience that you deliver to your people on a regular basis and figuring out, okay, what do I need to do to make this simpler? Earlier we talked about Apple and their brand, and to me, they are one of the best examples of simple never stops. If you think back to their products and how they've introduced their products and how they improve on their products on a regular basis, they've recognized that, at the time they deliver simplicity, but they know that in a year or two from now, they've got to make it simpler. Gosh, it's been 15 years, I think, when everyone was blown away when Steve Jobs said that they can deliver 1,000 songs in your pocket with the iPod. A handful of years later, everyone was blown away again when he introduced an iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator all in one device, the very first iPhone. And now if you look at the very first iPhone, at the time, everyone loved it. People were blown away by its simplicity. But the first iPhone that was delivered doesn't work today. Apple has continued to make it simpler and simpler and simpler, to where they've even got the highest quality video ever in a smartphone. So Apple recognized the value of simple never stops. So what does that mean? How can you do the same in your organization? Well, one of the best ways to do that is to create what we refer to as a customer journey map. You look at someone like Starbucks, and if they were to take one experience out of all their experiences that they have, they create a customer journey map. So think about yourself as you're walking into a Starbucks just to get your coffee. And what are all the interactions that you have to go through in order to get your coffee? And then through that, where are the areas that Starbucks can improve on those interactions? You can do the same thing in your organization no matter who your people are. You can even do it for your donors or for your volunteers. So think about a volunteer experience map. It's not just a customer journey map, but it's also a donor experience map. It's a volunteer experience map. So what are all the steps that someone has to take in one specific interaction with your organization? And in all of those steps, where are the areas that you can improve? And a great example of someone that has done this, a nonprofit, is Diabetes Canada. A few years ago, they realized that their flagship P2P fundraising event had plateaued. They realized that the number of participants they were getting for the event were not increasing, nor were their donations. At the same time, costs were rising, and their need for increased donations and their need for increased participation was rising. So they took a look at that event. They brought in stakeholders from across the organization, people on their team, people in their board, some volunteers, and they went through a volunteer and donor experience map for that event. Understanding where are the ways that they can simplify, where are the ways that they can improve that overall experience for everyone that interacts with them through that event. And then when they created that, and then when they actually implemented those changes, they found a great result. Within 1 year, the very next year after having gone through that exercise, they increased their participation in that event by 56%. Not only that, they increased their funds just for that one event by 55%. So you have to be constantly looking at all the different interactions, all the different experiences that you deliver to your people, map it out, and then look at, okay, where are the ways that we can simplify and improve in those areas? Where can we pull the right levers to make sure that we're constantly improving that experience? The next behavior to deliver simple experience is innovate to stay ahead. So I got another pop quiz for you down in the chat. Let me know, what are your favorite examples of innovation? Now, a lot of times, Netflix. Okay, thank you, Allison. Yes, a lot of times people will say, like Netflix, people will think of Tesla, Amazon, Uber, Waze. Oh, interesting. Yeah, very good. Airbnb, absolutely. Yeah, that was a great innovation. And a lot of times when people think of innovation, they tend to think of mostly tech companies and tech disruptors. Cheese fries. Thank you so much, Kim. My goodness. Memphis cheese fries too, right? Here's the thing about innovation. And if anyone had a chance to see Sarah Frasca at the latest City Current event, she spoke here in Nashville a couple of months ago. I know she spoke in Memphis last year. She talked of the fact that innovation is not simply just technological disruption, not simply technological changes. Innovation is simply making a change and making an improvement to solve a problem for somebody else. And so when I talk about innovation, I tend to want to focus on more of those non-tech differences, those non-tech changes that companies have made. One of my favorite examples is a company called Buku Bounce. I don't know if you're familiar with these. If any of you have kids, you've probably seen this before. Buku Bounce is one of those big warehouses you can go to that's just filled with bouncy houses for kids. You know, you bring your toddlers in and you pay a price, and then they can go and they can get tickets, and they can go and bounce in all these different bouncy houses for however long, for an hour or 2 hours. Well, the owner of Buku Bounce looked at his primary and target customers, which are toddlers, and he realized something about toddlers. And I don't know if you know this, but it turns out that eventually toddlers grow up. It turns out eventually little kids get older and they grow up. And the owner of Buku Bounce realized, if my customers are toddlers and they grow up, they're not going to want to come back. So what do I need to do? So he took about a fourth of the space of his warehouse and took out a couple of bouncy houses and converted that space into more of an arcade center, put in more arcade games, skee-ball games, air hockey. And that way, as the toddlers progressed out of the bouncy houses, they moved and they grew up. They then wanted to go and play at more of the arcade games. And he was able to continue to hold on to their loyalty as customers, all by looking ahead and thinking, what can I do to solve this problem? What can I do to meet my customers' needs as they're progressing? Now, to innovate, to stay ahead, that means you've got to be constantly looking ahead. You have to look out, into the horizon and say, okay, what's coming down the pike? What's happening in my industry? What's happening to my customers? What's happening to my people that's going to affect the experience that I deliver to them? And what are the changes that I can make in order to meet those needs before they happen, or as proactively as possible, or with as little reaction as possible? To bring it back into the nonprofit space, I don't know if you've heard of Musicians on Call. They're an organization that helps bring musicians into hospitals to play for bedridden people, to play for for those people that are in hospitals and being cared for in hospitals. Now, a lot of times, they're famous for bringing in famous musicians like Hootie or Darius Rucker, rather. But they bring in a lot of regular musicians as well, because the value is so high. The music that they provide really adds to the care. Now, a couple of years ago, when the pandemic hit, of course you couldn't bring volunteers into hospitals anymore. And so a lot of companies, when it came to the pandemic, they looked at the experience that they were delivering. They realized how the pandemic was negatively affecting their experience, and that there were things that they just simply couldn't do with their experience. So a lot of companies simply stopped those types of experiences, but not Musicians on Call. They figured out, okay, what's a way that we can still bring musicians to patients in hospitals? And this was a simple way to do this. But before March 2020, not many people had really heard of Zoom, had really been using Zoom virtual calls. And Musicians on Call realized, hey, by using Zoom, this is a way for us to still be able to provide music to patients, and for us to be able to have musicians still interact with patients. They were able to do it with everyday musicians. They were able to do it with bigger name musicians as well. And so they were able to continue to provide that experience at a time when patients and hospitals still needed that human connection the most. And through that, Zoom, the corporation Zoom, actually recognized Musicians on Call, and they named them as the winner of their. They named them as an honorable mention in 2020, and then in 2021 they named them as the second, or rather the first runner-up, second place for their Zoomtopia Awards, innovative ways for using their technology to reach other people. So all that to say is that you've got to be constantly looking ahead and recognizing what are the changes that are happening to my people, and what are the changes that I need to make in the experience in order to meet those changes. The next behavior in delivering a simple experience is to minimize barriers. No matter what experience you deliver, no matter who your people are, they're going to have some barriers that will prevent them from getting the full value of the overall experience that you deliver. Now, I have 2 kids, and so like most every family, Chick-fil-A is probably our go-to restaurant. We love Chick-fil-A. And now, I don't know if you know this, but little kids love Chick-fil-A as well. Toddlers love Chick-fil-A. But if you've ever had to go into a restaurant, if you've ever had to deal with the experience of ordering your food, paying for your food with toddlers in tow, it's not always an ideal experience. Somebody's always going to be crying. Somebody's always going to be pulling your leg. Somebody's always going to be wanting your attention while you're just trying to be able to order your food just so you can get down and get to the table and have a nice, happy meal with your family. So the toddlers who are distracting their parents are a barrier for parents getting the full value of the experience at Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A recognized that, and they created a service called Mom's Valet. With Mom's Valet, anyone who has young kids in tow, whether it's babies, whether it's toddlers, they can pull up to the drive-thru, they can order their meal and say that they're ordering Mom's Valet, order their meal and head inside. While they're parking their car, while they're walking, Chick-fil-A will set up their table, will set the table up for their parents and for their kids. And then the kids can easily come in and sit down, no distractions, no cries, no crying, no tears, distraction-free experience. All because Chick-fil-A recognized that barrier and found a way to minimize it. And so when it comes to the experience that you deliver, there's all kinds of barriers that people are going to have with interacting with you and your company. There's the barriers of knowledge. Really understanding what it is that you actually do, who it is that you actually serve, or understanding how they can actually interact with you, how they can support you. There's the barriers of access. Think back to Musicians on Call. During the pandemic, any volunteer had a barrier of access to be able to volunteer and help out with those hospital patients. Well, one of the ways to minimize that barrier was to create virtual access for those volunteers. There's the barriers of assumptions. I read a story a couple of weeks ago how there was an organization who did a lot of work with prisoners and prison ministry, but they were having trouble getting volunteers because the volunteers weren't fully understanding the people that this ministry served. There was a barrier of the assumptions about the constituents. There was a barrier of assumptions around around the prisoners that were being served and how deserving or undeserving they were of the ministry. So what are some of the barriers that your people have in order to get the full experience that you deliver, and how can you help minimize those barriers? All right, the next behavior in delivering a simple experience is to prune it back. So I didn't realize this until maybe a handful of years ago, but when it comes to gardening, there's value in pruning. When I had my first house, I put a bunch of azaleas in and I thought, the best way to let them grow is to just let them grow and not do anything other than just water and feed them. But expert gardeners know that if you want to get the full value from your plants, if you want them to fully bloom, fully blossom, you've got to understand how to prune it back. And that's just what other companies are doing with their experiences that they deliver. So think about the experience that you're delivering to your people. Think about the number of steps that it may take someone to go through an interaction with you. Are there 12 steps for someone to fully get through an interaction with you? And if there's 12 steps, is there a way for you to prune it back to 6 or 4 or just 3 steps so that it removes a lot of that friction, it removes those steps and makes it easier, makes it simpler for your people to interact with you? So some grocery stores and some convenience stores and some retailers started offering curbside pickup a handful of years ago before the pandemic. And a few people, decided to use this service, and it made it a lot simpler. It made it a lot more convenient. But when the pandemic hit, that's when that service became a requirement. People demanded curbside delivery. They didn't want to go all the way in the store. They wanted curbside delivery because they didn't want to have to take all those steps to go inside the store. They didn't want to take the time being in there. And so now what was considered, a new value added service a few years ago is now considered table stakes, is now considered a requirement. Now other retailers, other grocery stores now use delivery service. So instead of curbside service, you can actually use companies like Shipt, have your groceries delivered right to your door. And so these retailers, these grocery retailers, looked at the overall experience they were delivering, saw all the steps that customers had to go through with that experience, and they decided to prune that experience back. They have been able to prune it back to just a couple of steps, and customers will pay for that experience. They'll pay for that. In fact, they're demanding that brands and retailers do the same for them. And then looking at other companies, even places like Great Clips, where I go to get my haircut is not Great Clips, but they have something similar. They have a database that says this is exactly how Matt Lyles likes his haircut. If you know me, I'm pretty particular about my hair. It takes a lot of work to make my hair look this good, but it helps in that every time that I can go and get my hair cut, they don't have to ask me each time. They don't have to spend 5 minutes each time asking, okay, what are we doing today? How low do you want it cut on the sides? Where exactly do you want the part? How much do you want to leave on the front? Because they have all that information in their database. They took that step, that 5-minute conversation of asking how exactly I wanted to have my hair cut that day, and they put that information into a database. They were able to prune that step back. So think back to the idea of journey mapping. Whether you're journey mapping for your customers, your journey mapping for your volunteers, your journey mapping for your donors, look at that experience and look at where are some of the steps that our people take that aren't that necessary, or are there steps that we can take and combine into one? How can we prune that? How can we prune back those steps in order to provide a simpler experience? All right, the next behavior in delivering a simple experience is to lose the jargon. Now, we think back to, I like to think back to one of the greatest movies in pop culture history, but what if it used language like this? What if it used language shown here? Thou truly art in jest. Art thou not small of stature if thou art a stormtrooper? Does empire shrink for want of taller troops? The empire's evil ways, I'll grant, are grand, but must its soldiers want for fear of height? Wasn't a lot easier to use language that we've come to know and love and to keep in our heads with, aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper? Now, we can laugh at examples like that because it's a pretty extreme example of showing, flowery, jargon-filled language and simplifying it in pop culture. But how much are we using jargon in our own content to everyone that we interact with? How much are we using jargon to our people? And we think of the nonprofit industry, There's a lot of terms that we tend to use because it's so well known to us. And because it's so well known to us, we assume that it's well known to everybody else. And I like to refer to this as the curse of knowledge. We all have the curse of knowledge around our own company or our own industry. And with that knowledge, we think that everyone else has the same knowledge. So when it comes to the language that we use, if you confuse your people, you're going to lose your people. If you want your people to connect with you, then they must understand you. And looking at the nonprofit industry, there are a lot of terms that we may use in our organization. There are terms we may use in our industry that we think is common to everybody else, but other people may see that and not fully understand what it means. So here are just some examples. Think of food insecurity. There are a number of nonprofits that focus on what they refer to as food insecurity, but the general public may not fully understand that. So instead of saying a term like food insecurity, you can say Donna is a single mother, has to choose between buying groceries and paying the heating bill. Oh, that's what food insecurity means. So whether you decide to change the jargon out and simply use that language, use the language that speaks directly to people, the way that they talk, the way that they want to hear things, or you can use the jargon and just provide a better explanation. Here's another example: at-risk youth. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, instead of saying at-risk youth, or you can say at-risk youth and use the qualifying description of our tutoring program works with high school students who are more likely to fail their classes, be held back, or drop out of school. Oh, okay, that's what that means. Here's another one: underserved, the underserved community. We can say Tina has to take 2 buses to see a doctor for her diabetes because there isn't a good healthcare facility in her community. And this makes her anxious during the height of the pandemic, and sometimes she had to skip her regular appointments. That's what that means. So it's taking a long, hard look at the language that you use and figuring out the people that we're trying to reach, whether they're volunteers, whether they're donors, whether it's the general public, to understand our organization and become advocates for them. Are we speaking to them in language that they fully understand? And if not, how can we change our language so that they do understand us, so that they can connect with us? So here's another pop quiz for you. I'm curious to know, now that you've seen that, I'd love to know, are there any examples of jargon or phrases that your organization uses in your messaging to your customers, whether it's your donors or your volunteers or the public at large? Are there any examples of jargon that you use that you think can probably be improved, can probably have a better description in the language that you give your people? All right, no examples there. So it's it's something to think about, and it's going to take bringing in outsiders, peer buddies in references to wow, peer buddy. Yeah, if you had said the term peer buddies, I wouldn't have understood that. But buddies in reference to participants, chapter leadership roles as well. Absolutely. Bring in outsiders. Bring in volunteers, but especially bring in people who might be new to your organization or who may not even have interacted with your organization ever. Help them, have them help you understand where they're not understanding the language, where they're not understanding your content and what you're delivering. And again, one of the best ways to lose the jargon in how you communicate with your people is through storytelling. So it's taking out those phrases and terms that people don't understand and using language that people use, using language that people want to hear themselves In addition to that, it's using storytelling. And one of the best examples of that is Hope for Justice. Hope for Justice is they're a global organization. Their U.S. headquarters is right here in Nashville, Tennessee, and they're all around creating advocacy around human trafficking and slavery, creating advocacy around preventing it as well as actually getting in there and preventing slavery. And one of the ways that they have that they lose the jargon is that they provide very good descriptions around the types of slavery and trafficking that people see. So, and a lot of times, and this was another barrier for people to interact with them as well, a lot of times people think of trafficking and slavery and they limit it to just sex trafficking. Well, Hope for Justice helps people realize that it's much more than that. And they show them that it's sexual exploitation. And here's what that means. It's also forced labor. And here's what that means. It's domestic servitude. It's criminal exploitation. It's forced marriage. And with each of those different categories, those are all the primary categories. And with each of those categories, here's exactly what that means. Then they take it further by providing storytelling to their people. And they use storytelling, depending on your industry, depending on what you're able to do. Sometimes some companies and some industries may be limited to just creating the hypothetical stories. But as much as you are able, people are going to resonate and connect with stories of real life people, real life individuals. And Hope for Justice does this on a regular basis. As they have helped rescued and saved people that have been in slavery and helped them get acclimated back into society, they deliver stories around these people to help you understand this is exactly what the organization does. This is exactly who you're helping. So they provide lots of stories around real people and real situation. So when it comes to losing the jargon in how you communicate with your people, it comes to using that simplified language, but it also comes to using storytelling. All right, we've gone through 5 of the 6 behaviors. We're bringing it home. The last behavior is empathize with customers, or empathize with your people. So let's go back to Chick-fil-A and their mom's valet service that they offered. Here's the thing about that service. No customer ever came to Chick-fil-A and asked them to create that service. No focus group said, oh, you know what? It would be great if they had a service like this. No one ever asked for it. It came from one Chick-fil-A owner-operator in Florida observing his customers. He actually sat down and observed his customers and all that they had to go through throughout the experience that they had with Chick-fil-A. And not only that, he was a parent as well, and he remembered back to a time when he had toddlers, when he had babies, and he remembered what it was like to go through that experience. He was able to recognize the challenges and the struggles that his customers went through during that experience, and he was able to empathize with them. So, when we talk about empathy, it's not just sympathy. It's not just caring for somebody else. It's actually recognizing that person. It's actually figuratively, or sometimes even literally, walking a mile in their shoes to understand what they go through on a day-to-day basis. And what they go through on a day-to-day basis, what are the external challenges they face? And then based on those external challenges, what are the internal struggles that they face? Now, good news, in the nonprofit industry, nonprofits have done a great job of understanding empathy with the people that they serve. However, I don't think enough companies are doing a great job in using empathy in the people that are experiencing what these companies deliver. So beyond just who you're serving, it's empathizing with everyone that interacts with you. It's having that empathy for your donors, empathy for your volunteers. And that means understanding what they go through on a regular basis. So your donors, are they already receiving way too many asks? And trying to understand when they're receiving asks, what each individual donor is going through, and what are the best ways to reach them. Some donors want to be reached directly by phone. Some want to be reached by text. Some want to be reached by email. Understanding them and empathizing with their needs in order to be able to reach them the way that they want to be reached. And when you empathize with your people and when you deliver an experience to them that shows that you empathize with them, they understand, oh, you know what? This company gets me. This company understands me. This company cares for me. And because of that, I feel valued. And when I feel valued, then I'm going to be more loyal with that company. So think about the volunteer experience. If you have a brand new volunteer who wants to interact and volunteer for your organization, what do they go through on a regular basis? What do they go through on a day-to-day basis? What are they going through when they look at your site and they say, okay, I want to volunteer, but maybe I don't see all the information on ways to get involved. So empathize with them and empathize with the fact that they want it simple. They want to be able to quickly understand how they can get involved with your organization and how they can quickly and easily support you. So just run back through those behaviors one last time. Those 6 behaviors for delivering a simple experience to your people are: simple never stops, innovate to stay ahead, minimize barriers, prune it back, lose the jargon, and empathize with your customers. And now, we talked about all these as ways to deliver simplicity to the people that interact with your company. Whether it's your donors, whether it's your volunteers, sometimes whether it's the people that you serve. But there's a big secret in delivering simplicity. When it comes to delivering simplicity, it starts in-house. It starts with your own people. It starts with your own employees. When you think about the experience that you deliver to others, your employee experience drives that. So you can try to create simple experiences for your donors, your volunteers, your constituents all day, but it's only going to come through, it's only going to really shine when you're developing simple experiences for your people. That means you've got to create a culture of simplicity in your own organization. And that means that when you think about your people, now when you think about your people, it's more than just your constituents. Your people are also the people who actually work for you. Sometimes it's the people, sometimes it's your employee, sometimes it's your volunteers, but your people have to be greater than your processes. That means that everything that you do, everything that you deliver, everything that they deliver to each other has to be a simple experience. And when your employees receive a simple experience, when your employees have that culture of simplicity where they know what it feels like to receive a simple experience and to be able to deliver it to each other, then they're going to be able to more easily deliver it to your people. So as you've been looking through this, have you been, seeing these stories, these lessons? It's usually around the time where somebody says, hey, that's great. Hey, Matt, you know what? I want to share this with my company. I want to share this with my team back at the office next week. Can I have a copy of your slides? Well, I'll actually do you one better. I'll provide you with a copy of my simple playbook. And this is a playbook that I've designed that outlines all of these behaviors that go into creating and delivering simple experiences. But not only that, it describes the behaviors and it provides questions and prompts. It provides questions for you and your team to go through an exercise with each of these behaviors and understand, okay, what can we do in order to better deliver on this behavior as part of our experience? So you can have free access to my simple playbook for yourself. And hopefully I've made it simple for you. You can go to mattlyles.com/citycurrent. You'll be able to get access to that simple playbook that shows you all 6 of those behaviors, along with ways that you can incorporate that into the experience that you deliver along with your team. And I know they'll provide a link to that in the chat down there. But before we go, I just want to remind you that, again, simplicity starts in your own house. It starts with providing and creating your own culture of simplicity, because when you build a simplicity culture, your employees have the clarity to innovate and they have the clarity to deliver on those simple experiences. And when you do that, your people are going to have a better brand experience. And when you build a simplicity culture, your people will reward you with their loyalty. So to put that into simpler terms, when you have a simplicity culture, when you focus on a culture of simplicity and delivering simplicity to your employees win, your people win, and then you win. Everyone wins. So I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the examples you've shared in the chat. I know we have some time for Q&A, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have now.
We'll give Matt a round of applause already.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Thanks.
No, and what's funny is I was laughing as you were talking about the nonprofits reaching out, multiple asks. We talk about ours, but we had one organization reach out on the same day 4 different times asking for 4 different donations, all from the same organization, weren't communicating at all. And it got to be like, are we getting punked? Like, is this for real? But just the simple reality of sharing information behind the scenes of even little things like birthdays and being able to send out reminders. I mean, there's so much knowledge behind the scenes that you can share to simplify the donor engagement, the volunteer experience. I think there's a lot. I look at websites every single day for nonprofits, especially coming on the radio show.
Right.
And I'm always surprised. You go to a nonprofit's website and half the time, and I know them, you look at the mission and the programs, and a lot of it just doesn't make sense. And when you talk about cutting out the jargon and simplifying the language and the experience, I'm always surprised how complex some websites are and how way oversimplified some are that don't even tell you what they actually do. And so just for me, as someone who on the media side is going to try to figure out how can I make this the best interview, websites out of date, not talking about relevant programs, no description. I love the fact when you talk about the food insecurity and so many of those things, because they mean different things to different nonprofits. The jargon to me, and there's a big push right now around even not calling nonprofits, but calling them social impact organizations. When you talk about words like, impoverished, at risk, well, those kids don't think of themselves necessarily at risk. So we're putting a label on them already from the philanthropic sector who's trying to help. So it's like, there's a lot of things that I think unpacking what you're talking about really does not only simplify, but really better engages volunteers and donors and those board members, especially who are passionate about what the nonprofit does as a cause. So lots of great stuff.
Yeah.
Go ahead, everyone. Here's your chance to put in the chat box or the Q&A if you have specific questions. I want to start out because I do love the fact when you talk about the customer experience, the volunteer experience, the donor experience, doing a map and looking at all those touch points. Give me maybe 1 or 2 of your favorite tips when it comes to really laying that out and asking the right questions, because in many cases it's, are you asking the right questions? But to be able to really map out what that looks like and simplify those processes. Give us maybe 1 or 2 of your favorite tips around those journey maps.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to journey maps, it's not creating like the overall map for everything. Okay. So from the first time that someone hears about us all the way until they're an advocate for us. I would go deep. Look at one specific interaction, or even, like Diabetes Canada, look at one specific event and then create a map around that. And that helps make it much simpler for you and your team, and it helps you to not get overwhelmed. So my biggest takeaway there is to go deep and look at one specific interaction or one event.
And when you talk about, and going back even to Sarah Frasky now, she talks about innovation is not the big innovation like you're talking about. It's a lot of small little steps.
Right.
When you look at engaging, especially changing behavior around that, how do you look at kind of the small change where, and I'm thinking of just maybe an example that pops into your head of, okay, they typically would come through, I guess the first example that comes to my head is, instead of all of us just kind of mapping something out in terms of making an ask, figuring out who knows that person best. So having a little bit of strategy so that there's a structured ask. But what's a small innovation, I guess, is my point around a specific behavior that can be changed.
Yeah, honestly, one of the smallest examples, and that I've seen, and this is more of like in operations, like in a warehouse. An innovation can be as simple as moving a trash can 50 feet, just so it makes it easier for everyone to be able to access it and be able to get their job done.
When you talk about branding and simplifying the message for a nonprofit, like with their mission statement, their programs, I love the illustration, like you mentioned, for, here's what the definition of sex trafficking is. What's another tip around, just for website specific? How do we simplify that messaging that goes on a website and is your kind of face forward?
Yeah, I think one of the things when it comes to your website really is to not inundate and overwhelm people with everything. We talked about creating like a journey map, for an experience. You can also have your website take someone on a journey. So instead, you can look at some of the simplest websites out there, like Google. We know that Google is super complex and there's all different tools and different ways to interact with them. But when you go to their home page, it's super simple. Now you can get to wherever else you need to from that page, but they don't inundate people. They don't overwhelm people with content and information. So I think when it comes to your website, the first place that someone's going to interact with you, don't make it overwhelming to them. Start simple. Simply show them who you are and who you serve in simple language, and then provide them with easy buttons, easy navigation for them to be able to learn more.
And I think just around that, you look at upcoming nonprofit events now that things are opening back up, putting them on your website. There's quite a few that you go to the website and the event's not listed. You have to go to Facebook to get the information. It's like, wait a second, put it on the website, put, like you said, all those links and even sponsorship information, ticket prices, the event time and everything. But I love too now the innovation around the mobile side of bidding for silent auction items, and even opening that up ahead of time and opening it up to where there's more of a, not necessarily a global reach, but definitely a wider local reach, to be able to bid up and raise obviously more dollars for the silent auctions. But that way, for those who aren't physically able to attend, they can still participate as well. So I think there's tons of innovations that you can leverage as a nonprofit, but once again, pushing it all on one page, simplifying it so you don't have to search for it everywhere, but also go to 5 different places to be able to even purchase a ticket. So I think there's a lot of little things that, as you're talking about, constantly looking, how can we simplify? How can we reduce the friction for our volunteers, for our donors, for our attendees, for our board members, all these different things that I think are really important to continually kind of ask those questions. What's something maybe that you didn't put in the presentation, but is a question that you like to always make sure that nonprofits, I mean, you yourself obviously work with a ton of nonprofits, but what are some of the questions you like to ask to kind of look at areas that are full of friction that we can start kind of reducing down?
Yeah, I think one of the first places is in the first touch points, the first interactions where somebody where someone wants to even interact with you. So if you're thinking of your donors or your volunteers, usually the best places to look are those very first touch points. That's where you're going to get the biggest return. That's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck when you make improvements. Because it's in those first touch points where someone is usually not that familiar with you. They're not familiar with your information. They're not familiar with who you serve and what you do to serve others, but they're also not that sure on exactly how they can get involved with you. So it's in those first touch points that I think where you have the opportunity to make the biggest change in simplifying that experience.
I serve on quite a few different boards, and there's one in particular that I'm thinking that really has done a great job of simplifying the process. But when you talk about things like consent agendas, making sure that everybody has all the information ahead of time, they put it all out. They use Convene as an app, but it's an app that they can push out and upload all the documents, upload all the information. Everything is right there. It sends a push notification that says everything has been uploaded. You can read through it. It's all in one place. And then it links if you need more information. And so that way you're prepared prior to walking in. You don't get 10,000 emails. It's one simple place with all the information that has the last notes, the consent, like everything that needs to be voted on, everything that you need to have to be successful. And then when you arrive, you can, accept to do your calendar update and everything. So it's all online. But when you arrive, you just pull that up and you have all that information right there. And it saves a tremendous amount of time, but it simplifies that process and keeps everybody on the same page. So I do think even down to a board side, once again, continually saying, how can we simplify? Just because we've always done it this way in the past, we have so many more tools now at our disposal. How can we simplify the process for the board? And I'll tell you, it's made a big difference for me because seeing how they operate, it's like, I wish we could do that with some of these other. Let's start going and steering the board in this direction just because it does simplify. And so I think that it becomes kind of an opportunity that fuels more innovation, because once you get used to asking those questions and looking around and seeing how others are doing it, you can start pulling that in, to your organization as well. And I think that's where the board really plays a powerful role is, as business people, you're seeing all these different things. How can we integrate that in with the nonprofit side, the social impact side, to be able to help them continually simplify the process?
Yes, right. And it's looking at whatever it is that you're doing, whatever experience you're delivering, whether it's an event or whether it's a fundraising site or whether it's simply a meeting, it's looking at it from the other person's point of view and then thinking through, okay, what questions would they have coming into this, and how can I answer those ahead of time?
Yeah. Well, let us know if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, we will send out a thank you for attending email. We've been recording this, and so we'll have the recording of this that you can watch on demand. Obviously, Matt was generous enough to provide the link, and so you've got the playbook. So you'll have the video, the playbook. We'll send out a thank you for attending email that will also have all of his contact information as well. So you can carry this conversation forward with Matt. Obviously, he can, kind of customize it from there for your different organization and really dive in much deeper. But thank you, everybody. You're getting a lot of kudos in the chat there. So thank you, everyone, for spending your Friday with us for this Get On Board series. Thank you again to the Assisi Foundation of Memphis for helping us to fuel this fire and fund this series. We appreciate it. And obviously, thank you to Matt for being able to give us your graciousness on the time and your generosity with the expertise to be able to help us. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Friday and your weekend ahead. Go Grizz, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.